Antes que nada,
That's okay. We can start. First of all, I would like to welcome, on behalf of UNODC and the Excellence Centers based in Mexico City, to this webinar that has the intention of showing the 2023 World Study of Homicide, that it's made by the Research and Analysis Division of UNODC based in Vienna, and that was released in New York last year. As you know, the global study in homicide is one of the most relevant documents globally, such that it gives the characterization of the homicides with different characteristics. Especially, this edition is the fourth one, even presents a specific chapter for Latin America, where we relate the homicide phenomenon with organized crime. And we give you the warmest welcome from Mexico City, but on the panel, we have a very rich one of great partners that along years we have collaborated in different activities, and I start to introduce Ma'am Angela Mem, which is the head of the research of the UNODC, that is here with us this morning from Atlanta in the framework of the Corruption Summit. She is the person that supervises and creates this kind of reports globally and regionally, not just the homicide, also the drug, cocaine, and people smuggling, and also traffic against wildlife. In her career, Dr. May has assisted a number of countries, has collaborated with a number of institutions, not just to improve the statistic information in a number of countries, but to generate some tools that allow different institutions that get an understanding. Maybe that's one of the most things, the world classification of felonies. She's a co-author of a number of analytic reports in this UN framework, along with other people. So first, I welcome Dr. Nathalie Alvarado. She's the technical coordinator in sector of the safety, citizen safety in the Inter-American Development Bank. Dr. Alvarado has a number of years with experience in a number of areas in the training of institutional capacities and governmental ones here in Latin America, especially in the safety, citizen safety and justice sector. Since 2012, Madam Alvarado implements a strategic agenda of safety in Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, that has impacted in terms of the implementation of a number of innovative cooperations and different assistance projects in the region. Thirdly, I do welcome Vice President Adrián Franco. He's Vice President of the INEGI government body since 2019, and he has been one of the main leaders in the framework of the development of the information in terms of safety and justice, not just in Mexico, but in Latin America. And as of today, well, he will be talking within his framework of the coordinator of the task group of statistics of policies, police departments that are starting work in the Americas Statistics. Master Franco is not only the accountable person since 2019. 2009 to 19, he has been in charge of the statistics of in the government for safety and justice in INEGI, and he has a master in public management by the Manchester University in England, and also another master in public management by SEED. Lastly, I would like to introduce Dr. Verónica, which is accountable of statistics of justice and crime from the census in Ecuador, who performs as the accountable of statistics of safety and justice in this institute. And she's leading, and she's part of the coordinating team in Ecuador, not just of the development and the coordination among different institutions in the safety sector and the providery of justice, but also in the building of the indicator of feminicide. And also she's creating, along with UNODC, the pilot project of the statistical framework of feminicides. I do thank you on behalf of the Excellence Center, your participation, two of you as I mentioned, like our members are in Atlanta, Costa Rica, and maybe this additional effort of trying to participate in something like this, well, the different findings and having some kind of a reflections partner. So without any further ado, well, I would like to then to introduce the most relevant findings of this global study.
Greetings to everyone, indeed, from Atlanta. And thank you also to you and to your team in the Center of Excellence in Mexico, really for always the great organization and for taking the leadership always to promote quality knowledge in the Latin American region. So I will start by actually showing the results of this fourth edition of the Global Homicide Report. So I will start. These are the global figures. As you see, we estimate about 458,000 homicide in 2021 globally. That is equivalent to a 5.8 homicide per 100,000 population, again, globally. And I'll show you the many differences across the regions and sub-regions. But this has been the 2021 really a high peak in our global estimates. Since the adoption of the SDG, this is the highest number of homicide that we estimated globally. In 2022, we cannot offer now a global 2022 figures because some countries, particularly maybe some large countries in Asia, still have not finalized and released their data. But bringing together information from 2022, it looks like there has been a slightly decrease from 2021 in terms of global homicide, but still quite a high level. I also want to see that beyond the report that you can find in the UNODC website, I would invite you to go also to the data portal. And in the data portal, you find national data that we have compiled across the countries for 2022, for 2021, or also 2022. So you can find for most countries also data for 2022. And our efforts is not just compile the information, but to make the information comparable. So the data series, the global data series on homicide that you will find on the website is a comparable website where really we bring data from different countries, but also we make them comparable and fit the international and standard definition of homicide as the international classification of crime for statistical purposes. So one of the things, again, starting from a global picture, I just wanted to show the proportions in terms of how homicide globally fit into other type of violent deaths. And you see here that overall, and this is an average, annual average between 2019 and 21, and you see here how the homicide are much, in terms of number of victims, much more than, for example, conflict deaths globally, all conflicts globally, but also terrorist victims that, according to the International Classification of Crime, are actually part of intentional homicide. You will find also in the report an analysis on, the issue that that homicide, intentional homicide, and conflict deaths. Sometimes there is a blurred line between, because there are also intentional homicide that are perpetrated in conflict context, and so that's why you see an interaction between the homicide and the conflict. For 2022, the situation, those bubbles will be a little bit different because the conflict deaths have dramatically increased, particularly with the war in Ukraine and in Ethiopia, so more than double that blue bubble, while the homicide in a way remain the same. And so for 2022, roughly, homicide still represent double the number of conflict deaths globally. So here is just to give them the colors, is the distribution of the number of victims of homicide across region and countries. And you see the Americas, the red, in a way to give an idea, the proportion again of how the Americans in terms of number of victims feature around the whole globe. For the first time this year, we estimate that the number of victims of homicide is highest in Africa, We have always had it more in the Americas, but for the first time, the highest number of victims for 2021 was in Africa. But Latin America, as I'm showing now here, continue to be the region with the highest rate of homicide. So when we compare it to the population, and here you see the bars that represent in terms of numbers by region and in terms of rates. Clearly, there is a slight difference when we put it compared to the population. Here again is a global map to see where the spots, of course, the darkest colors represent the highest rate of homicide. And again, just to have an idea where the hotspots are clearly South America, but also, as you can see, also part of Africa, where we can estimate the homicide. Now here is to trigger down and to now try to characterize and see more the homicide disaggregated. And we start with age and sex. And you see, and this is for Americas. We cannot construct this globally because the data for Africa and Asia are not as refined as we have for the Americans in Europe. But for the Americas, you see that the percentage, the highest percentage of victims are male, and particularly young male. You see here, even if there has been a change between 2015 and 2021, still they are the highest rate of homicide in the Americas. And you see there the female homicide rate, and you see that if there has been in the region overall decrease of, you see the difference between the blue bar and the red bar, so progress between 2015 and 2020, and you see clearly decrease on rate, particularly the young male. There is not much progress in terms of the female rate. And here is, again, to have a snapshot by region and sub-region, and in terms of trend. And you see that overall in the Americas, and here the trend is compared with Europe. You see the bump in early 2016-17, and now a slight reduction in the Americas as a whole. But you see here, actually, when the Americas is divided by sub-regions, you see that some regions see decline and others increase, particularly in the last few years. You see particularly the increase in North America, but also in the Caribbean, and particularly in the last 2 or 3 years. Here is beyond, counting victims of homicide, we really make an effort to try to characterize homicide, because, it's important. We count and we provide estimates in order to understand better how to prevent it. And so it's important to understand the typology of homicide, because every different typology require different prevention strategies. So one way is to prevent, for example, a killing in the family or in the context of violence against women, and other strategies are required, for example, to reduce homicide relating to crime, and particularly organized crime. And so you see here in this slide how we characterize homicide, mainly through 3 main typologies: homicide related to crime, homicide related to interpersonal violence, and social political homicide. But also within these 3 categories, you see here also that, for example, interpersonal is divided between the home and interpersonal relating to outside the home, relating maybe to the competition of the resources, etc. And also crime, in relation to organized crime or other crime, or social political violence that may be relating to political agenda or social prejudice. And so this is in a way the conceptual characterization that we use for homicide. And we also, based on national data, we also estimated the size of this different typology. Clearly, not all countries in the world are able to characterize this typology, but every time where we give this estimate, we see that there has been progress. So more and more, really, countries also see the importance and are also able to characterize homicide. You see here, in a way that, for example, globally, 22% of homicide related to organized crime. But when you zoom into the Americas, you see that actually organized crime is responsible for half of the homicide. The bar that you see here, they represent the uncertainty level, because clearly these estimates carry a lot of uncertainty during the gaps that we have. But and what you see there, the numbers in the bubbles, is the best estimate that we can produce based on the data that we have. But here, and again, we can do this only for a global level and only for the Americas and Europe. We don't have enough data to do the same for Asia and Africa. But again, it's striking the difference, the typology that you see between Europe and the Americas. Like in Europe, the great majority, 70% of almost 70% of the homicide related to interpartner and family related homicide, while this is in the Americas is only 11%. This does not mean that this type of violence is lower in the Americas. It's just that the level of homicide is much larger in the Americas, and so these are only the share, the proportion. Now, why is important to here? It gives an idea of the also, you know, the estimates that I showed you earlier clearly also mask very different typology across countries. And here is an example from the Americas of few countries. And you see here the orange represent the share of homicide relating to organized crime, and the dark blue is the intimate partner. And you see the dots are the level of homicide. And you see that where the share of homicide is highest for organized crime, also the level of homicide is high. So clearly organized crime also trigger much higher level of homicide. But you also see that in the Americas, there are different typology. And then you have Chile, in a way, where the great percentage is relating to intimate partner, where it can be characterized. By the way, the gray area is where they are known. So you see that still many homicides cannot be characterized. But for example, Chile looks much more like Europe. In Europe, if you see more or less the characterization of the homicides look like more focusing on intimate partner and family than crime. While you see, for example, the striking example and with Jamaica, where the majority is organized crime. Now, it's important also that to understand the how the different typology evolve. And again, here is the trend that we could construct in terms of trend only for few countries in the Americas. But you see that the violence relating to organized crime can quickly change. And I give you an example, and I'm sure you in the Americas know many examples where we can see organized crime trigger all of a sudden, so very jump and trigger very high level of violence, or it can also drop very quickly. While violence relating to intimate partner and family is very hard to change. And that's really also suggests that the root causes of intimate partner are more relating to stereotype, culture, etc., that are much more difficult to change in a short time. So they require much more longer term also policies. While the organized crime is can be relating to factors that change much quickly. For example, drug trafficking, drug routes, they can change more quickly. Now, here is to zoom into the intimate partner and family-related violence. And here is the number of women. I wanted to, we have made an effort within the estimates of homicide to also look at the femicide. And while the femicide as a whole perpetrated within the family outside, many countries still not estimate. What we can estimate is probably the largest part of femicide, that is the killing of women that happen by partners or family members. And so within this effort, we have been over the years really trying to improve the estimates, to support countries to improve these estimates. And you see here the trend that we can estimate for different regions in the Americas. You see that overall increase in terms of femicide, while in Europe long-term probably decrease. But you see also here the different trend by sub-regions of the Americas. But in terms of characterizing homicide relating to organized crime, as I was saying earlier, this type of violence can really very quickly change. Here is the example of Ecuador, the country that has experienced now, I mean, other countries in the past also have experienced a very large surge of organized crime-related violence. I think Ecuador now is really experiencing this violence relating to the control of the routes. And you see here an example of a change, the drastic change that has been in Ecuador on the left. On the right is also to make the point that the lack of violence does not mean the lack of organized crime. And here is a research that we have done using INEGI data to look at indicators that could proxy the presence of organized crime in different municipalities in Mexico. And then we looked at the homicide. And here, again, you can find a lot of the details in the report. But here, basically, what you see in this graph is signify that at the beginning, when there is not much organized crime, suggesting that when organized crime is imposing the territory, there is a lot of violence. But the more organized crime there is, then the less violence. That really suggests that in a way, when organized crime take charge and then control the territory, then also the violence. So that is the message to say that is important to clearly see that a high level of homicide, particularly in the Americas, related to organized crime, but it doesn't mean that the lack of violence shows a lack or the absence of organized crime. Here is just to give you an idea of the other typology that we look at the social political, and you will find again in the report example where we look at this, and particularly we have looked at the killing of people that defend the territory, defend human rights, humanitarian workers. And so here is just an example of the trend in terms of killing of journalists. But I also wanted to zoom into an analysis that we have done that you can find also in the report, but also in the World Drug Report that we have published in June, is an analysis of the Amazon region, where we really saw, and the fires that you see there in the maps are particularly attacks to environmental defenders. So again, we're showing where there is a concentration of cocaine production together with other forms of crime, illicit mining, crimes that affect the environment. There is also kind of a crime that push the communities and the communities that push back. And so you see the killing of environmental defenders, the killing of human rights defenders. And that is really where, I mean, in regions like the Amazon is the concentration of this convergence of crime together with this violence that particularly affect the community, and in some cases in the Amazon, particularly indigenous community. Now here is to look at the mechanism. So again, in the characterization of the homicide, we also look at, how the homicide was perpetrated. And clearly here is looking at the firearms. And you see that globally, the firearms account for about half of the homicide, of the all homicide globally, but you see that this is particularly acute in the Americas. And if you go into the report and you see the maps that look at for the Americas and Europe, you see the striking difference that basically in the Americas, so all the great majority of homicide are perpetrated by firearms, while in Europe is more sharp object. And you see here, 75% of the homicide in the Americas were perpetrated with firearms, and only 17, for example, in Europe. And you will also find in the report an analysis that shows how the share of homicide committed by firearms and the level of homicide, they're highly correlated. So really, suggesting how the role of the firearms, particularly in the Americas, play in terms of triggering high level of homicide. And also, but we see also in analysis in the report that this is not only an issue of ownership. There are countries, for example, in Europe that has a higher level of gun ownership than, for example, in the Americas, but much lower level of homicide. So something that characterizes the Americas is the combination of a high level of trafficking, not much ownership of trafficking of firearms, and organized crime that trigger this very high level of homicide in the region. And here is the example of the analysis that I was mentioning. Here you see the percentage of the change of share of homicide committed by firearms and changing in homicide. So you see that the higher the share of homicide committed by firearms is, the higher is the homicide rate. And here the example that I was mentioning to you between the dots are the ownership, firearm ownership, and the bar are the level of homicide. And you see that you can have a high level of ownership with low homicide and vice versa. So here is to conclude is we have also look at the response, to the criminal justice response to homicide. And here is you see the rate of people that you see here the victims of homicide, the blue, compared to the red and orange that are the red are the suspects that are brought into formal contact, means people arrested or investigated, and then the people convicted in orange. And you see this across the region, and striking is the Americas, where the large gap between the level of homicide and in a way the level of the criminal justice response in terms of arrest and conviction, clearly suggesting that the region, the Americas, is the region with the highest level of impunity. And here you see on the right also a sex disaggregated data, so to show that the majority of perpetrators are male, more than 90%, and over the years this has not changed. Now I concluded by just showing the prisoners, and so the rate of people in prison for homicide compared to total people in prison. So you see the homicide prisoners are the red, and in terms of a percentage. And you see here, if you want to zoom in the Americas, is that you see that, for example, in countries like Caribbean and Central America, there is the highest percentage of prisoners that relating to homicide convictions, compared, for example, to North America or other region. So again, this is my last slide, just maybe to invite you to look at also a chapter that we have looking at mega trend. So how do we understand and think about homicide in the context of everything else that is happening in the world? And so we looked at the homicide in the context of the change, the demographic change. We looked at it also in terms of climate change and how this, particularly how climate change can change and reduce natural resources, and how this can also sparkle violence. But also inequality, income inequality that is rising globally, the rapid urbanization, and the digital transformation. So you will find the details in the report on the analysis. So with that, Adriana, back to you.
Thank you, Angela, for this. It was amazing how in a few slides you were able to summarize 5 long chapters. I was even more surprised to see the executive summary or the key points, but actually I think your presentation gives a very thorough idea, or invite us to several different agendas on the upcoming year. Ángela, muchísimas gracias. De verdad me sorprendió la capacidad.
Angela, really thank you very much. I got surprised to just place 5 very complex chapters with a lot of information summarized in less than 30 slides, and you fulfilled the number of minutes assigned. So before giving the mic to the next panel member, well, I would like to, the interpretation that we're having in different languages, we have simultaneous interpretation Spanish, English, Angela for English and Portuguese, and due that the number of participants that we have registered, we cannot give the word. We see that since the beginning of the session, there's some hands raised. So it will be impossible to enable some kind of mechanism for everyone that is registered or participating would do it in live voice. So we would like to invite you that any question, any comment, or something that you would like to participate, do so through the chat, and I will do my best effort as a moderator to share the largest number of questions to our panel members. Now, after this presentation, that as I was mentioning before, I believe that it was very strategic, or in a very clear way, it gave this very clear overview of the information available. Angela,
I just bring one question on your mind for a bit later, and using the opportunity that you are the chief of the research and analysis branch and you're in charge of different drugs. Can you think a bit later in a second participation on how we can put together different informations? If you can link a little bit on the organized crimes and the links between drug trafficking, the link with human trafficking, and some other resources, statistical resources, analytical resources that we already have in UNODC. Le pedía yo a Ángela de manera muy rápida si...
I was asking Angela briefly if before going into the section with our panel members, if we could go and take advantage as a head of the research unit on UNODC, if she could mention how can we use other resources that we might have at UNODC, with the statistics available related to human trafficking or drug trafficking and other topics and resources available. Without any further ado, I give a word to Dr. Nathalie Alvarado, and maybe I will just place this context that we were thinking a lot about what to do in this first seminar, and we place it as the first activity that it could be the launching of a number of sessions for 2024 and 25 in different subregions of Latin America. And one of the reasons for which we invited the IDB, well, actually two of them. One, because they have been such an walking along through the funding and the technical assistance they provide along the entire region, but also in terms of policies for prevention, detection, training to different institutions of public safety, security, and also they have been an amazing partner in the establishment of statistical capacities in the region. And I believe that just that, what Dr. Mea just showed, what Latin America, it's one of the regions with more information available. Well, it maybe show the success of these participations altogether and the accomplishments of these investigations. And the floor is yours, all the way to Costa Rica. Thank you very much, Adriana, for this introduction, especially for the invitation. Thank you very much to everyone. I do want to thank the UNODC through the Excellence Center for this invitation. A special greetings to Angela May.
Admire this capacity of presenting such a complex report in simple words. Así que felicitaciones, Ángela. Excelente tu presentación.
So, Angela, my regards to you. Also, I salute Adrián Franco, Vice President of Information and Public Security in INEGI in Mexico, and an invaluable partner for all the work that they have done, and also everyone that are here in this very relevant event. So I would like to, since the first launching, since 2011, that I remember about this report, it has always been like a very significant in what are the homicide, the causes for the reduction. So I would like to maybe rescue some of the comments that are my thing, that it's a really valuable report for our region in Latin America, where we know the quality and the availability of the information established in terms of safety, always it's a big challenge. And I do want to highlight the very important mission that this report provides with all the public information, both for the countries, to have this compared and all the public policies, and also the academy with this information that are trying to go forward with this information that are most needed in this region, and also to those causes that are underlying all the maladies affecting the society in general, that allow to take to some awareness. And well, I would like to so international bodies like us, the IDP, that will support different systems over decades with this really high and important. So it's very important for the business for a dialogue with our counterparts in different countries, in the different meetings. And well, there has been a really strong point of view to start our dialogue. Well, it's a way to include our designs and of the different interactions with different. So thank you again to the UNODC and in general to generate this report that is so valuable to everyone. I would like to highlight this particular characteristic of this report on homicides, which is that it expands every day further this analysis, and I believe that the Global Homicide Report of 2023 will not be the exception. Indeed, it will be this study that shows a number of things with the previous reports, and I would like to highlight and echo some of these points that Angela mentioned because they're so relevant to the work that most of us do here in Latin America. One of them is the importance and the approach that about the explication of the causes behind the violence. So it's just to understand the context of where these homicides come from. And Angela was mentioning about the characterization of these homicides and also about the granularity. I mean, the relevance of having this data at level of country, but also at level of city, maybe even at by neighborhood. And I will go further when we touch the emphasis that the report about some of the discoveries of organized crime shows. On the other hand, to add this analysis that I believe that it was so important for us to work in the improvements of the institutional capacities for countries. And that's this topic of the analysis of the capacities and skills of the criminal and judicial system. And I believe that is super relevant that based on the number of people that have been arrested, processed, and lastly, condemned by homicide, that compared to the number of victims gives a really good look of how the system works to find where are these loopholes or these gaps to find the impunity in the region. And for me, that's another very solid message that it's how to approach the whole chain of the system, because at the end, the goodness and the strengths that might be could be like the disadvantages for other with another perspective of how the system works. Some findings of this study, which are very relevant to highlight, sadly, we're still the region, the most violent region in the world. It's important to see how this phenomenon is so dynamic in our region. If there might be in some countries or sub-regions in South America, we also saw with a lot of concern the homicide rates that have grown so rapidly in places that is truly surprising. And before this was not the case at all. Unfortunately, violence against women and feminicide, it's still endemic from our region. And as Angela was mentioning, what is concerning to prevent it somehow, and the hard thing to do is to get to this prevention task or prevention programs of this phenomenon that is like so rooted in our region. So for sure, that is something that I would like to highlight how relevant it is to have better statistics of violence based in gender, as well as tools that could use that information on behalf of the bank, while we still promote the need of capture with all this clarity and the characterization of this violence. And well, sometimes it's very important, well, the level of the region, and we continue to promote strongly. Also, we have implemented a number of analysis tools with a risk assessment, violence against women, and of course, some data to to come to a predictive analysis. And we start with some initiatives of the open data to the standardization of the homicide data in the region. I believe that these initiatives are fundamental to keep moving forward on that pathway. Another data that I believe that is really shocking, and we have to highlight and go further, is the rate of homicides that we have in Latin America of children, boys and girls. That is even twice of the global average. It's some circumstances that in many cases it's not unseen and it's not properly reflected in the statistics. That topic needs to be prioritized. That's why on behalf of the IDB, we're starting to generate a number of works to use the availability of the data, because violence against boys and girls, many are pointed at the online sexual exploiting and the sexual abuse on children. Also, another of the data that were highlighted, the loss of the human capital that we have in the region, particularly men are still the main victims of this kind of homicide. And many related in Latin America is related to organized crime. And that is one of the things that I would like to really stop a little bit to talk about the organized crime in the region that has been generated, as Angela mentioned, the increase of the levels of homicides. And these homicides also are related to a major proliferation of guns in the region that most likely is very linked, closely related to the organized crime. As this report shows, the challenge of organized crime that we're observing, it's not the same that we had 2 or 3 decades ago, and that is really rising and impacting some areas that we could not think about before. So we see this menace that is really escalating, and that explains the vulnerabilities of each of our countries, and that have capitalized in phenomena like globalization, the commercial expansion, the digital community, and even the pandemic, to strengthen and diversify and expand their influence. I believe that this takes us to the other point, which is the dynamics of the organized crime that are changing so rapidly that it makes much harder the understanding of this phenomenon. These organizations participate in a wide variety of markets, exploiting a number of illegal economies, usually going to intimidation and violence with the intention of showing power. And also, as Angela was mentioning, they can operate without any violence. And I believe that there's this really partnership about how they infiltrate communities and institutions. So organized crime is a general problem in this region, and its nature, the hidden and complex nature, makes it harder to measure this, to approach this in an effective manner. In that sense, and due to that nature, complex and hidden of organized crime, the region requires to move forward on the data and quality information. But not only that, we also need to develop some specific methodological instruments that allow to channel and identify how they operate, what's the dynamics, and how they impact. And these methodologies, as more specific, they require to have a lot of granularity. That is, that these are data almost like terrains or territories. Besides this, we need to move forward with qualitative data. And I mean a lot of surveys. Those are phenomena that are not reported, that are not spoken, and many of the dynamics due to fear and, well, how these organizations impact clearly is in a very dark and hidden way. So we need to move forward with different instruments. The IDB, we believe that this is a fundamental step to understand this ecosystem that strengthens organized crime and generates some proper response policies. So this is an area that we're starting to work in, clearly the development of some kind of collaboration with a number of institutions. It will be fundamental to move forward in one of the phenomena that as of today are affecting us in a very hard way in the entire region, and we need to have other kinds of instruments. I would like to finish, restating the relevance of the information of this report, and clearly I do echo the message that shows this report, and even though it might be repetitive, it's fundamental. The lack of consistency and lack of data will impact any of the efforts that we might try about safety policies or security policies, and to move forward on the statistics, on the different frameworks to analyze phenomena as complex as organized crime. Is a step that we have to work at the level of governments or the stakeholders, such that we prioritize this aspect. In this sense, this report should not be just seen as a summary of where you see that we're placed, but as the launching point of where you see that we need to go in this route to an effective and sustainable solution of this malady. And well, it starts with quality data, and it's a collective responsibility to ensure that these data are available, that the data is reliable, and it's a reach of each of us, such that we can work at the region to accomplish, of course, what we'll want, a safer place. Thank you very much, Adriana. I will need to be to leave before the completion of the event. But well, there is a team that, along with me and the IDB, if you have some questions, specifics about this presentation and the work that we're doing. Thank you. Thank you, Nathalie. We know that we're inside of this meeting with staff members, and well, regardless of anything, I would like to thank you for your participation, and what you have highlighted really moves forward this conversation and even open up some different conversations, and even you establish some guidelines that we can start working next year in a coordinated manner with different countries and institutions that may hopefully raise their hand to work on a specific task. And well, before giving the mic to the next panel member, I would like to highlight something that you were mentioning about the need to have consistent information and the use of the statistical framework as a dialogue tool. That is what allows the characterization in a general manner among different institutions of the phenomenon. And that's what allows us to understand in a different way, to have common goals, and to be able to build different activities in a coordinated manner and as a team.
There are a few questions, and some of our colleagues that are participating here, they would like to have a little bit more of insights on what and your latest slide about the digital transformation and automation could increase the homicides, and also if you can explain a little bit more on the slide where you were relating the phenomena on organized crime and lower homicide rates when organized crime is kind of settled and is not fighting for the territories. También nos preguntan si vamos a tener
also they're asking if we have this presentation available. If you give us a chance, next week we will have it translated into Spanish. And without any further ado, I will give the mic to our next panel member, Mr. Verónica Cuzco, from the National Institute of Ecuador. Vero, please go ahead. Thank you very much. Good morning. Thank you very much, Adriana, for this opportunity. I would like to start first greeting you and especially thank you for the Excellence Center and also UNODC on behalf of our Executive Director, Mr. Trujillo, that given previous commitments, he was unable to be with us this morning. Well, to share a bit, if I have the chance, I would like to share my screen. Okay, I believe that you are seeing that. Can you confirm that? Yes, just if you can place it in presentation mode, that would be easier. It's uploading, yes. Great. So this morning, I wanted to share a bit Ecuador's experience about the homologation and validation of data, and also to some indicators of homicides. I would like to start in telling how we articulate the official statistics in Ecuador. We have a national statistics system that is made up by all the different institutions of the public sector that perform some statistic activities. This all is around the national statistics system that is intended with the development of some development strategies that could be nationally and based on some international models. So this agenda is towards the official information and the spread of this statistical information in an organized and articulated manner. The NEC, is the organized center, is the National Statistic Council, and it's the coordinator of this space. And within the different tasks that the institution has, besides articulate, create, and plan all the different statistics information, it also has the attribution of create some special commissions for statistics with intentional objective to is provide to the institutions are part of this system to improve the statistical information. And in ECBO, it has three active coordination. One of them is the special coordination for security, justice, crime, and transparency. This organized basically is to provide the information and spread it on this topic of security, justice, crime, and transparency. This way, the statistic national system is articulated through the technical spaces and strategic of these specialized commissions. And the framework of these activities, is where we manage the information of intentional homicides and feminicides as well. I would like to mention some methodological aspects of the statistical record homicides. Well, it's just some information, official information, which is accessible in a timely manner, presented and in real time, when the gathering of the information is made every day, which the intentional homicides, with the intention to have some support for the design of public policies and also for the decision making for those the stakeholders immersed in the creation of public policies. The analysis unit, I would like to highlight that this indicator has been built based on the methodology of the recommendations of inclusions and exclusions of the international classification of felonies in terms of the statistics. We have the information available since January 2014, and as I was saying, the information has a daily gathering all the way to 2023. The source of this record, this statistical report of intentional homicide, is made by the National Direction of the National Police. And there is this process that we perform within the technical framework and strategical of this commission, which is made this validation of quality. I was mentioning, it was being mentioned in the presentation by Nathalie about the relevance of having quality data in a timely manner. So a validation exercise is performed along with other managemental services that supplement the quality of this report of intentional homicides. And then we have the integrated information, which is the trends of crimes that the State Commission provides. We also have the judicial information. And well, it's worth to mention that's what happens in the courthouses. And also we have the validation of information with intentional search in some cases that stay like undetermined. And well, they have this statistical record that would be detected every year after year. So this somehow as a process of the statistical information in a macro way of the intentional homicides. And additional to that, we have another process that allows to follow up case by case of the information of the records of intentional homicides of women or feminicides. In this particular instrument of the National Statistic Committee, well, we to provide the information. And so we start with this technical organization that it's made by all the reports of all this sector, the official version, and also the executive version. So we start with 3 managemental records. One of them that is the National Police. This happens to when a body is reported. Another one is from the prosecutor office from the state, where which reported some kind of life-threatening situation, and the third one by the judicial and the managemental system, where all the information is put together. After taking care of these different managemental records and the technical provider, well, they make this validation, a consolidation, and update. So if we have all this information, which is updated, and also with this degree of information such that we can have some homologated information. So with this exercise of consolidating all the information, well, we have this record database that works for us to generate some descriptive analysis, some indexes in the justice sector, and also for spreading the word on this information. And this INEGI coordinates and leads to the process of the validation of the statistical records of intentional homicides and this other gathering of the other kind of homicides. I would like to center in this slide and to show some of the main variables that are gathered in this intentional homicide record of women. This indicator that shows some models that might give us the information on the traceability of the record. We start with some information when coming through the document, the initial document, once the authorities have been aware of a commitment of a crime. Then the National Police goes in there through the specialized units for violence acts, and they gather the information through the the information gathering tool. And then we have the opportunity to understand a number of variables like geographically that we can characterize the event and the kind of weapon, the cause of disease, what was like the alleged motivation of the commitment of this crime, and in other variables that allow us to characterize the victim, like for instance, age, nationality, ethnics. We have if the victim was pregnant or on the side of the alleged aggressors, and other variables where we gather information that allow to characterize socially and demographically, like age, sex, nationality, ethnics, and what was the relationship between the victim and the aggressor, if they're on the run, and lately, well, the response on behalf of the state. We have some variables of information that allow us to be aware of the pre-process stage, on the process stage of each of the intentional homicides of women. So as we can see, we have the traceability of the indicator from the initial record all the way to opening the previous research, judicial file, if the case has been judicialized for the providery of justice, And lastly, to find out if the aggressor had a sentence and if this sentence was actually made and what's the process state. After that, well, like a management of information, I would like to comment with you which are some of the phases that this international task force of the static team, how they operate to consolidate and the buildup of the statistical record, initially with the gathering of the information in the different institutions, as I was mentioning at the beginning, it's the courthouse, national house, the judiciary state, and well, they gather the information with their own within their own competencies and the gathering of information among many other variables. They also collect some information on their own activities, and well, this the statistics might be selected such that they will improve the analysis of the issues of intentional homicides and specifically feminicides and violent death of women. The information is consolidated through this articulating mechanism that we have. And about the processing of information, well, we then proceed to build this database that is validated and homologated and consensus by the institutions. And we perform the estimation of a number of things that are useful for statistics, and then we create the statistical reports. And moving forward to the analysis of the information, we create some indicators. Some of them are with some tabulators on some tables and indicators of homicides, feminicides, and then they create some descriptive analysis or comparing analysis for each information, that historic information that we might have. And lastly, in the diffusion stage, all the institutions that are part of this institutional task force, well, we supply all the information, all the statistic information through a number of means. It could be our websites or some releases on websites or the social media and other means. And well, then to satisfy all the requirements of the information required by different users, it could be academia, social, civil society, public institutions, international organizations. In here also, through these records, we do provide a response to a number of questions that other institutions might ask us, maybe even selective science institutions. And well, in here, I would like to share with you some of the statistical products that the institutions spread for the different websites. From INEGI, we have this website, this space in our website where we publish some information of a larger caliber, and all the inside ministry is in charge of intentional homicide research. They also spread some information of data also within this policy of open data. Also, we have the monthly spread of the database of variables that might not be sensitive or not confidential. And well, data is open access for the user. And well, just like to finish my intervention, well, some data about intentional homicides in Ecuador. And well, Madam Nick she mentioned and gave us example the case of Ecuador. So indeed, what starting in January to November 2023, we have seen 7,269 intentional murders. Clearly, it has been way beyond what was record on the same period from January to November. It was 4,152 intentional homicides. So we can see this trend that has also been mentioned. Ecuador was a country that up to 2019, its rate of intentional murders by every 100,000 inhabitants was not beyond to 10. But starting in 2020, we see how this has been increasing, this indicator. So by 2022, it was record 22 violent deaths by every 100,000 inhabitants. And compare one more year, if you will see these typical years of the pandemic, in 2019, Ecuador has experienced a 294% increase of this indicator of the intentional homicides rate. If we compare this 2022 with versus 2019. Some variables that allow us to characterize the intentional homicides. And here there's some data for 2022. We get to see 8 of every 10 victims was murdered with the use of a firearm. The percentage following is by a sharp object, and where it was the violent acts happened, we can see that over 60% of intentional homicides do happen in the public space. It could be a house or a private sector, maybe just 50%. And in 2022, this year particular, for this topic of the carcerary crisis that we experience and we still have, it was recorded that a number of homicides were happened in the retention centers. We have other public places with 7% and other private places with 12%. I would like to focus on the last 2 slides to tell you some of the characteristics of information that we do have available in the feminicide record. We have consolidated information from August 2014, date where the feminicide felony was typified in Ecuador, all the way to 2023. We see that the data has been changing how we interpret them, and the data says that 7 out of 10 victims was hurt with a sharp object as or choked, and while the largest percentage of 30% was murdered on their own home, which means that the victim was living with their aggressor. And to finish this, a number of the characteristics of victims and aggressors for the given the information that we have of the statistical record of feminicides, we see that 49% were children or teenagers under 18, 4% of women, murdered women were pregnant, 44 women were indigenous, that 71% had at least one child, and on the side of the profile of the aggressors, we can see that 5 of every 10 aggressors were from 18 to 34 years of age. 22% of the aggressors are outlaws. A number of these aggressors committed suicide, and out of 100 victims, 80 were murdered by their partners or ex-partners. Well, so that's my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Vero, thank you very much for your presentation. I believe that you were so detailed, and the activities of articulation and coordination that show a clear leadership on the statistic office, and also that dialogue capacity with other institutions that have not had along the time. And from the excellence centers, we can only thank you. That leadership of sharing with us within the feminicide framework. I believe that your presentation was very detailed, and you increased the number of, raised the number of questions, so we can give you the opportunity where during the presentation of this Vice President Franco, there's a lot of methodological questions and validation criteria and the statistic criteria. So maybe today's participation that we're having, and we see the questions is very rich. I mean, there's if we have prevention policies of homicides, they're asking if we have an exercise of training to police officers. Maybe the request, some of the questions and interventions might be a little general. Maybe we won't be able to respond them all. And yet, if we request that it could be like more detail about what specifically you need, maybe we can articulate some kind of responses and address them to the existing resources, or to start conversations within the different organizations and panel members that are present here today. And well, lastly, it was like two different communities, like a dialogue. One of them was the creation of statistics and information, but also with a dialogue with the institutions that exercise the different responsibilities and functions in terms of public policy, procurement, and providery of justice. So maybe this closing of this panels, our last panel member is Mr. Adrián Franco, that today is the chair of the task group of La CEPAL, the Statistics Commission of the Americas, and a little bit on this analysis that it was being presented at the beginning. We just don't need to look a particular statistic or particular number, but with different phases of the procurement of justice, where she was warning about the efficiency or the management of some institutions. We thought it was so relevant to have the presence of President Franco, such that he could share this regional look from the perspective of the Statistics Office, from his role of coordinating with different institutions, but also within this framework of this new task force that regionally we have agreed to work together to implement some guidelines that recently we published in UNODC, and well, to walk along during the implementation. Vice President, most welcome and thank you.
Adriana, muchas gracias. Primero que nada, muy buen día.
Adriana, thank you very much. And well, first of all, great day to everyone that are here today. I'm so pleased to be here. And of course, with all of you, with Angela May, that we have shared for a number of years these topics. She looks younger every time. I look older every day. I have more gray hair and less hair. I don't know what's one of her best kept secret, and another very well kept secret. I don't know how she does to have a very relevant, such a relevant integration of a statistic information from homicides of all the countries. For those of us who gather the information, is really complex, that all the statistical points, all the points of creation of information is given to us in a consistent but timely, that we can compare to know which data we can put in a box that someone is providing to us. It's something that we really like, that it really corresponds to a particular box, and we do this at a level of the country. I can barely imagine all the headaches that Angela has suffered all these years doing this at such a level. The global interest, Angela, my acknowledgement to you and your team that you do all the information, the great information that you provide to us. And also thank you, Adriana, for this invitation. I'm also great to see Angel Alvarado from IDB, that we have shared a number of topics, and Angela Hosco, that has been our colleague and partner in a number of options. So I love to share this panel with four amazing women. I really so pleased. And well, before starting, I know that talking about homicides is a sad topic, but I would like to mention that I hope that you all are well, and to wish you happy holidays this end of the year. And well, I will start with just this anecdote. 2019, the city of Kuala Lumpur, it was the international summit of the International Statistic Organization. And among a number of panels that I was part of, there was one that was very particular, where I have to share gladly with the statistical people from New Zealand and Austria. And the topic on that panel was violence against women. I showed this data back then of homicides, women homicides, and given the gestures that I was receiving from my colleagues, I was not quite getting the picture that they were showing. At the end, both of them, at the end of the panel, said, it's not possible that we have this data. In Austria and New Zealand, we have about 80 something deaths per year, maybe 70 in New Zealand. It was so concerned because it has increased 5%. That means one or two more murders per year. So as they were not believing to me, I opened my computer, I opened the INEGI's data, and I explained. You see, look, this is the total amount of homicides per year. If we divide this by the 365 days, it means that in a single day, I have all the murders that you have in an entire year. And even then, with the data in front of them, being statistics, both of them, well, the Ministry of Justice of each country says it's not possible. How is it possible to live under those circumstances? What I mean is that there were three people with a background, with an accountability which is similar, but with the same phenomenon that impacts our society. And a number of times, an ongoing question in the world is how come is a murder in Mexico then? Murder in Mexico then, it has been reducing slowly. I mean, things are slowing. Some of the murders have been slowing. I mean, it's a slow process, but we have been reducing, I mean, in the last years. And yet, let me tell you something. This seminar is planned to last 2 hours. In 2 hours, in our country, and by murder, died 8 people in 2 hours, of which 7 are men, 1 is woman, most likely, well, according to the average data, and 6 might have died due to a firearm. So that's 8 people in 2 hours. Died, and data of 8 people is the number, the annual number in countries like, if I remember, like in Singapore or Chipre or Cyprus. I'm sorry. It means in 2 hours we gather the same amount of murders that in 1 year versus 2 hours. So to have a picture of murders, it's a very complex thing. You know, it's to reach rate in Mexico, even though is decreasing, we have those numbers. Now, another ongoing question, and well, in Mexico, it's all like that? No. We have some states, some places in the country where the homicide rate is 2 every 100,000. Yucatan rates in some countries in Europe or more developed would be jealous for it. Really, they would be jealous. 2 for every 10,000. But then I have other states where I have a rate of 115 murders every 100,000, one of the highest of the world. I have one city that has over 2,000 homicides per year. One border city that have all the complexities of all kind of criminological and social phenomenon. So this homicide phenomenon, it's not easy to explain. Where we see a national rate, that data by itself has to be taken to interest us to disaggregate the information and to get to know it deeper. I will share some slides, some information, such that I can assist myself with this topic. And also, Adriana was mentioning that she wanted me to talk about some task forces, and gladly. But every time that she says, "Well, why I was invited," she says something different. I didn't have a problem with that. I will mention something, some reflections about the studies of homicides, and another one about some exercises that we have had at the level of Latin America and the Caribbean, a regional level, 2 task groups, and that supplement the homicide groups. That is, they follow the same trend of creating a statistical information. So, and final reflections. So, the first thing that this homicide reports creates to me, as Angela said, is to highlight and underline a number of information. But the first lesson that we received, the global homicide study, one of the first conclusions is that disaggregated as the information may be more useful. This information will be. I mean, it's not useful to know at a national level. I had this level of homicide. No. We need to know disaggregation by men, women, sex, age, ethnic group, like different circumstances in which we can, for something so relevant, not only know the data, we need to be able to use the data. So as disaggregated the data might be, that is something that provides little by little the global study of homicides, and more useful will be, I mean, all my colleagues before me were talking in a very generous way about doing some policies for gender, for children, boys and girls, some victims, for vulnerable people. We were talking by Angela and Nathalie, that men, young men, and all that. So it's very important to have all that data. I have some of the slides that Angela was showing, comparison between men and women. We see women, we see how women die and all that. In men, there is a very important loss that you might notice in young populations. I mean, we were in some regions, and we have some regions, some localities where we might be losing major workforce, because that's the productive age of people. So we have to be careful how things change, especially with demographics. One of the discussions that we have in the country is it changing the life expectation in a number of regions due to have this level of homicides that in the region has not been reduced. A second idea that really jumps from this report, the global study of murders, the global study in homicide, how to focalize. I mean, it's not the same thing to have all these murders in charge of the homicides that another murders that have been addressed to interpersonal relations. This is something that in the discussions of countries, not just in Latin America, I believe that in the whole world, but maybe in Latin America and the Caribbean is very focused. What kind of homicides do we have and where they happen? I mean, in the borderlines, the shorelines, where murders have been focused, like major cities, murders in some areas. It's a phenomenon of larger cities, and in other cases, of rural areas. For instance, in every country, every region, homicide is totally different. And that allows us, in the first step, the global study in homicide allows us to understand and to know, because it's not the same thing to go to one place and copy a successful policy and we want to implement it in a different country, which it doesn't match, because how homicides are happening is not the same thing. So this graph that Angela showed is absolutely relevant. The rates of homicides and this color bar of organized crime or other ways of crime. For instance, the first 10 countries. Not always organized crime is the one that provides these rates of homicide, maybe some other kinds. So the explanation of the placing of the homicide phenomenon it's not homogeneous. We cannot make this homogenic explanation of all the countries. I mean, it's not the same issues and all the same solutions. So this is fundamental of the learning. So the use of firearms, of how people die, it's also very important. Angela was relating traffic arms to homicides. Clearly, there's some phenomenon that apparently they're apart, but when we put it together, we start understanding a number of the phenomena that we have. For instance, in Mexico, we said 7 of each 10 people died do happen due to firearms. Indeed, we see that it's not the highest. There's another graph, Honduras, very close, Paraguay, and well, other things. But it's a phenomenon that we need to study. And for sure, the third idea that really jumps out of this report of the global study, it's that this allows us to learn, to understand. Actually, there's this chapter, it's called Understanding. So this topic, I mean, when we talk with the authorities, on the statistics parts, when we talk to the authorities, they say, I decrease the number of the homicides, so automatically the perception of insecurity should change. Or I reduce other felonies, and then also the perception of insecurity. Well, conclusions, very quick conclusions. First, homicide as such, from my own perspective, is not exclusively the single, not the best way to do public policies to fight back violence and crime. Homicide is a social expression with all the characteristics that we might want placed in a particular context in this time, in a particular society, but it's not like the best way. And I'm saying this because in a number of places, a number of authorities say, we are going to do this public policy to improve social, and they only look for homicide data. Even for some particular data, it just look only for homicide. No, homicide has a very particular nature. So we need to understand that homicides and homicides as shown as the global study of homicide need to be supplemented with victim surveys that might measure how unsafety is measured or the perception of people with other things that happen in the context, like what they observe that happen in the everyday things or those things, those antisocial activities that do happen in turn around the households. But we need to understand that the homicide data need to be supplemented with other things such that we have a better understanding of what happens in everyday life of people. This is super important to supplement this data, but the global study of homicide, in my conception, is the door gate to start seeing on everything else. I believe that Angela and myself, for a number of years, I will not use, I will allow myself to use the word dream, to dream the countries of having those three instruments. To be very clear, the homicide record data, another manifestation of felonies, the victimization service that gives us what the record information might not provide, and perception service about safety. With these three elements, if this would be used on behalf of the authorities, most likely we would be talking about different conditions in our societies. So the typical example is this one. To understand phenomena in a different manner of the perceptions and the victimization of people, of what happens inside of the household or outside of the household versus what might happen by effect of crime and specific manifestation of organized crime. We have this different information. They go up and down because the manifestation, the criminology of the manifestation is different. And we may have other social phenomena which is harder to move. So this is very relevant. Now I will go to another field. And the other field, we call this title Statistic Innovation in Latin America and the Caribbean. To call it something, we're actually talking about how we generate, how we gather statistical information with other subjects that supplement the homicide report. And I will talk about two particular exercises. One of them is within the statistical framework for Latin America. I'm sorry, the statistic coordination of the entire region of Latin America. Many of you know that there are some task groups that over a decade, Mexico has been honored to be the head of these task groups, along with the Excellence Center. We have been working with a number of topics, and in the last years, 2 years, we have been working in this topic that is fundamental, which is to explore the capacities that we have in our countries to create some penitentiary information. And maybe many of you will say, well, what are the penitentiary systems related to the homicide? Well, a moment ago, Verónica was mentioned that many of the homicides in Ecuador are related with the penitentiary system. If we know which are the legal sanctions that happen to people that commit murder, and how is the phenomenology within the penitentiary centers for homicides, most likely we might understand the circumstances further, or this relationship. So this task group was made by 5 countries plus the Excellence Center. We worked with all the countries in Latin America, but what's most important, what I want to tell you, it's the document is ready. It's ready for you to consult it. It's some kind of that motivates the countries to get to know further it's not apart from all the relevant work that the UNODC has been doing in the penitentiary systems. Au contraire, I mean, they do follow the guidelines that the UNODC has stated for this exploration. And if I focus on the document, It's highlighted the methodological part, like the methods that each of the countries may develop or have for the development of this information, the institutional capacities, which is central for to document and the work that we perform in terms of resources, methodologies, how do we spread, how these systems are being governed, the challenges and recommendations. Some of the examples, for instance, of the information that we gather are related to the resources existing in the institutions to generate penitentiary information. And these are cataloged. Each system can have a reading of these documents and to move forward the structures of the statistics have their own country for the production of data in terms of human resources, materials, the profiles of the people with incarceration, how state, ages, socio-demographic conditions, and the whole condition and the felons that were convicted for the specific population, the experience of the people that have been in prison, and all the safety within the penitentiary centers, and all the measures of the privation of freedom. And well, this document has all this concentration of the institutional capacity, which is the central goal of this document, is to incentivize the countries to generate this institutional capacity. And they have to do with the capacities of the retention of the centers and how we coordinate. That's very important from the statistical production to the different institutions that have in charge these topics. So, for instance, in terms of institutional capacities or statistical capacities, the development of capacities, which is something that it's very important for the production of statistical information in this penitentiary system topic that takes us to a number of things. The first one is to generate some institutional capacities or skills, not only in the statistic institution, but also in the institutions that need to generate this data, because at the end, as UN gathers the information, like the for murders, and they do gather information, and also we will have more information on that. That is something a very relevant topic to understand the phenomenology of the felony. So we will go to the development of capacities or skills and the statistics capacities. How do we integrate? And the other thing is to provoke the institute who should use the information that we're creating. Something that is very clear for all of us that manage statistics. If we fill our computers with data, with the best methodology, with the highest quality, has zero value if it's not used by the institution that need to sort public problems, public problems that are related to that statistic information. So that's very important that this information needs to reach the, for instance, in this case, the institution, penitentiary system institution. And another topic, it's something that we are just barely starting this year, just a few months ago, that the America's Statistical Mission just presented to create these guidelines and records to the management of police for Latin America and the Caribbean that keeps a close relation with the information of homicides in a good part of the Latin American, Caribbean countries and other places in the world. Some of the police members are the ones that gather this information. So the question is how they are reporting this information. So that's the question. There is a very important information that the UNODC office published, which is the guidelines for the production of statistic data. And what we want to do is a couple of things. One is to assist the implementation through this task group, to assist the implementation of these guidelines, and also to create our own guidelines. Like based on this, to follow up and to stand up for the region. A concept that we use a lot, I mean, you may know, is to tropicalize or to customize these ways to do statistics. So something very important in this statistic guidelines or this international standard, clearly we will have our resources, like how many resources we have a different nature for the statistical production, and with the police for how long. I mean, the statistic of different felonies, I mean, homicides and all kinds of felonies, attention and arrest and detention, and other activities performed by police members, the activities that the police departments have, And well, as of today, we have registered 10 countries to assist us to the build-up of this statistic data based on the UNODC information. Again, Mexico is the coordinator and the Excellence Center is our technical secretariat. Among the challenges that we have for that, well, one of them is the way in which we ask ourselves. There's a number. I mean, every police office or center or department at a national level, they might have a different way to record any kind of information that is recorded. So the typification of the felonies, the classification of the different kinds of felonies will assist us in this process, the UNODC process itself. I mean, all that is the statistical infrastructure will be careful to find out how they are recording or recording how this data has been reported. They actually show what they are supposed to show, the data that is being created and the quality of the data, considering that the statistic we have here tattooed on our forehead to look permanently that data are of the highest quality. So we will be working with this reference guide about the management of records of the police for Latin America and the Caribbean. And we said we have these two goals very clear. The implementation of these guidelines for the production of statistical data for according to the UNODC in Latin America, and to build our minimum methodology for the improvement of the management of records that the police institutions produce. And lastly, I would like to call your attention on a couple of final thoughts that concur basically on the same for homicides that for data operations and police departments. And if we put another phenomenal, it might be the same thing. So the first challenge that we face in Latin America and the Caribbean, something that it's the improvement of the use of the national statistics system. Verónica, just a moment, mentioned how Ecuador structures the statistical office, how they structure their relationship with the different institutions. So it's very important that if we want to strengthen the statistical information to take decisions, we have beforehand the creation of the local statistics information offices and the National Statistics Department. And this also goes along with human resources, technology, funding. In a number of countries, it's very common to hear conversations from the locals of, hey, I got a budget, a restriction, some of my amounts were taken away, so there were some changes because of this or that. So what we have to be clear is that if we want to solve some public issues with the complexity and the size, like homicides, violence, of having a better capacity of penitentiary, better records, really, the previous point would be the development of these capacities, financial, statistically, and the center, the National Center of Statistics. Another point is to provoke, from whichever our standpoint might be, to have some public policies based on evidence. And it means a number of things, but mostly because we cannot make decisions with about 7 or 10% of the felons recorded. I mean, the felon recorded, we need to know the size of a black number and then to have a better estimation of the whole thing. To make decisions with 7 or 10% of all the felonies or the crimes, it will have just that effect. It will have an effect towards having results a very small size. So it's very relevant to take in consideration data with quite a statistic quality. Are they expensive? Yes. Do we need to invest? Yes. Do we need to make major investments in the creation of statistic and data in human resources and technologies? Yes, yes. Such that we can have the proper public policies based with good and good evidence, with good statistics. And we need to provoke this, to trigger this, because at the end of the day, the experiences shows us that who take decisions not always take them based on evidence, nor good evidence, or the good evidence, they might not like it and they might decide something else. So we need to help us and to help them, those who take decisions, to understand the data. Most of the rejection of the data by the authorities, and this is a learning from a number of years, a lot of the rejection of the data is because they do not understand that they do not like it. So we need to understand this data. That is part of our job, to produce the data with high quality, but also to help them understand them. Another topic is to use the management of resources, yes, but also we need to start using other sources. I mean, in particular, recently, along with Angela and the UNODC, we showed in the UN Commission the guidelines for the statistics of feminicide. And when we talk about feminicide, if we will be just talking about women's homicide with some specifications to categorize it as feminized, we would be running very short. It would be very small. So we need to see the recourse of 9/11, the emergency services, the records of hospitals, records and files of some detention units for women. I mean, the basic example and very relevant violence against women, the feminicide violence, is highlighted the need of integrating different sources of information to characterize this phenomenon is the best thing that we could happen. So the best use of statistics from all sources to have a better picture of everything that actually happens. Something very important is that international standards, well, when we're talking about a couple of them, international standards of the penitentiary centers and the national centers, the police centers, the international centers, well, they love, also corruption that we're building along with UNODC, working on this manual to measure corruption. Those international standards is the basic guidelines that we can not just follow it as it is made, but also we need to create our own standards. I mean, we need to understand how to build these standards related to that. So that's fundamental. And cooperation with other organizations is relevant. I mean, statistics by our own, we cannot make it. I mean, there's some things that we could do it on our own. Actually, it would be very rare, but I cannot imagine an international, national statistical office would be able to survey of victimization by itself, all by itself. They have to invite other agencies, like the relevance of the information, the use of the information, asking what is it that they would like to explore. And now in the methodological and technical information of the office, how can they build the need of these information in variables as a survey, how the sample will be taken, how they will be assessed, how the statistical process will be made. So we need to participate with a number of other institutions. And in the managemental record, for instance, it is clear that we need to participate in a number of sources, the health sources, the statistical sources, police sources, all the different offices need to participate. For instance, in the Mexican case, INEGI, the institution, the statistical office, along with health, do participate along together information from deaths. And we get the information of homicides, which are the ones that we report in the global homicide study. And also we have the police information, and we do not deny that. At the end of the day, we put together all that information and we put the two sources together so that they can be compared. Evidently, our thing, it's a long scope, but the message is that we need to invest resources to create statistical information of high quality. So that will be the completion. And while putting myself at your service and thanking for the attention and also the organization, Adrián, Angela, of a very important event and having to have this global study of homicide. Now we need to study and understand it. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Adriana. Thank you, all, everyone. Thank you, Vice President. Well, four panel members have made my job so simple and hard. It's very simple because I will not have time to ask any question, and very hard because a number of questions have been raised in the chat. Angela, we do have a restriction of 10 minutes because of the interpretation. So I will give myself the freedom to give 5 minutes to Angela, such that maybe she can respond to some of the general questions. We will not be able to respond the questions of every country, but Mr. President Franco if you would like to ask in the last 5 minutes that we have left, two very quick thoughts. So the floor is yours, Angela.
And so I will maybe start by some of the questions that you asked me earlier, from where Adrian left it. I mean, the idea that of course, the homicide is just one part of that puzzle that we need to understand and put together to understand security, so urban security, but also, community security, family security, but also to understand crime. And, as Adrian was saying, the homicide reflect just one part of that part of security and understanding, how the security evolves. But I would say also the homicide is only one part, understanding organized crime and crime. And indeed, we have, and in UNODC, we collect and we put together and we analyze a lot of other data and in trying to understand crime, and particularly organized crime, because and I think it's very important to understand that the impact that organized crime has is not only on violence. There is an impact of organized crime on environment, and the Amazon is an example. The impact of organized crime on governance, corruption. Nathalie mentioned it during her presentation, but also if you want, the corruption of the political system, of the democratic, the trust on government, the impact on development, and so the social, all of those boys. We count in the homicide only the boys or the girls that died, but think how many are injured, how many are trapped into that crime vicious cycle, and then they don't go to school. So again, Nathalie mentioned the social fabric that is affected by the violence. And so what we look, for example, in organized crime is also, for example, trafficking in person, smuggling of migrants. There were a lot of questions on the violence to migrants. And indeed, more than probably, definitely some are related also in the killings, but many is a sort of violence, particularly in relation to smuggling of migrants. We see it when we analyze, how smugglers operate, and we know that, for example, the most organized mafia type of organization are the one that also impose most of the violence to the migrants, but also to the trafficking. And so it is also easier that the smuggling of migrants translate into trafficking in person. So clearly there is that we need to understand all of this. And then I go also on this thinking about the digital world. And, when we think about understanding crime and how organized crime operates, the whole cybercrime topic that, is emerging. And there was a question on the impact of the digital transformation on the homicide. And again, is the same as we have in the society in general. We have challenges and opportunities. And the challenges, are relating to the violence perpetrated into digital platforms that then they can be easily then become, particularly again, young people, and normalize violence through this, platforms, etc. But then can translate into physical violence, even if there is so much more research that we need to do to understand this. But there is also long-term impact on violence relating to digitalization, that is the loss of income, the very rapid transformation on the labor market, then will marginalize, and has already started to marginalize millions and millions of people. And this marginalization and crime, we know that there is research that shows how this then impact also on violence. And so in that sense, but clearly also digitalization has also an opportunity because brings education. It can be an opportunity in education, but also in combating organized crime. When we presented the homicide report in New York, there was the delegation of Jamaica that was making the point that actually in Jamaica they're working a lot on digitalized platform actually to prevent and in education among school on the preventing violence. Then just to maybe another couple of points, Adriana, if you allow me, one of the methodological aspects on how we bring together the data, and probably the Americas is more of an homogeneous, I mean, even if there are differences there too, but in terms of how criminal codes or definition of intentional homicide. Even if also in the Americas, there are diversification, and if you see data, even for the region, is very not always harmonized. But so what we do is we have a standard definition of intentional homicide that includes, for example, excessive use of force by law enforcement. Many think that this is not an homicide. From an international perspective, is an intentional homicide. And so if the countries do not include those numbers in what they call homicide, then we work with countries to come up with a set of data that then can include all of those elements as we include for other countries. The last one on children, in the report there is, and Adrián mentioned one show also some data on children. One of the things that not surprised me, but I think is interesting to notice on the violence of children, one is that we are talking about small children. So when we talk about until, let's say, 0 to 10, then is mostly domestic violence, and is mostly also relating to mental health of parents. And this is, again, across the world. And in those early, very early years, there is gender parity. In a way, boys and girls have more or less, I mean, there are some parts of the world where the killing of the newborn girls may be an issue, but maybe not much in the Americas. But then at a certain point, you see when it starts this divide where boys have a much higher rate of homicide than girls. And it's interesting to see that for the Americas, the age by which they start in a way this diversion, but then it means also when the violence and the homicide becomes to be outside the home, the age is much lower in the Americas than in Europe. So that really indicates how, in a way, the children at much more earlier stage in the Americas are exposed to the outside home violence and crime, etc., that, for example, you have in our region. So I leave it there.
Thanks, Angela. Pero 2 minutos. Sé que es un reto
Another 2
mayúsculo.
minutes. I know that it's a major challenge, but if you could please. Thank you very much to everyone to your questions. I try to respond them by this option that the app allows, but also I can share my contact if you might have something that was left unresponded. I just wanted to give us a conclusion. Us from the Institute, we believe that the strength of the gathering of the statistical information, it's through this service and other statistical options, and in this case in particular about intentional homicides, a fundamental step to guide both the creation of public policies in the different situations with intention of prevention, and the creation also of programs and some plans that may allow to face this issue of violence and intentional homicides. On the other hand, the joint work of institutions, and especially in this space that we will put together, INEGI leads the job, but the hard work is the institutions that produce this information, this data, like the national policy, the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, and we have all these institutions in which we have the opportunity to create this interinstitutional work, working along with the same view, with this trying to improve the quality of the data, and especially that it's made in a timely manner for the people that create the public policies. And yes, indeed, it has been hard for us at the beginning, like to present on the table the institutions that are from different organizations and with different functions in the state. It has been hard, and yet when we have that commitment, and I believe that will, not just technical, but also that political will, we can really move forward in this process. And well, at the end, there's some major challenges, like for some resources that Adriana was mentioning, among them, the methodology and all that. But we have been able to, as a country, to move together in improving the quality of the information, with some indicators as sensitive as intentional murders. And also I would like to thank the support that
el marco estadístico para nosotros.
UNODC has been providing also pilot. So it's important for us to spread the kind of indicators that allow us to visualize other situations like feminicides. And we are so enthusiastic about this work that we will be performing along with you. So that just as the final thoughts. Thank you very much. Vero, thank you very much. Adrián, I will ask 1 minute. The IDB team responded through the chat. So if you give us 1 minute to give us half a minute so that I can complete some house cleaning questions. Well, thank you very much, Adriana. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the presentations of my colleagues that I haven't been able to complete. I would like to highlight something. I believe that we all know something that it's called the risk by country reports. When these are being shown, the most global, what happens? I mean, things go up and down. The ministries are moving. The people are moved, so they move in terms of the risk assessment by country. I would like that this report and the homicide information would also cause some kind of changes in the country. When the global study of homicides, everyone should be concerned about getting to know it, to understand it, and to use it. Even to replicate the structure into the countries. The global study on homicides cannot use all the data, subnational cases. I mean, there's some information, but the national level is the understanding of homicide in different areas, in different places, cities, rural area, conflict areas, etc. So the most relevant thing is to get to know this global study of homicide, to understand it, and to provoke its use in public policies. With that, I would just leave, and I would thank the opportunity to see you all. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just for closing, I want to thank and to report in the Excellence Center. We will be talking on the translation of this report into Spanish. When we have it, we will spread it, and we will make it available to you. And if our panel members, the presentation will be also shared in the Excellence Center. One of the things that happened along the conversation is that we have some resources. For instance, the classification of felonies, and we are not quite aware, or maybe we still have some people that we still don't have it, and we would like to work with the 4 panel members to enable a number of links that might make it easier for the people that were part of this event today to have access to that. And maybe to thank President Franco, Angela, there was this request to force the UNODC website, and well, it was interesting to use the data portal that President Franco shared, some of his insights, and also to provoke this discussion for the participants today, that the information is already available and you can use it to make some specific analysis in your own institutional context. And without further ado, I do say goodbye. Thank you very much. And we will gather all the questions to create a conversation and dialogue agenda in 2024. Angela, thank you very much for provoking and all the effort in Vienna. And well, because you gave all this opportunity of activities here in the region. Thank you very much, and happy end of the year. Happy holidays. Happy New Year.
Gracias.
Felicidades.
Gracias.
Thank you very much. Happy holidays to all.